My name is Matthew Person. I'm a resident of Falmouth, and I'm representing the Woods Hole Foundation today as a member of the board of the Woods Hole Foundation. In case you don't know, the Woods Hole Foundation came into being in 1976. It was formed to provide a vehicle for contributions by public, spirited and charitable-minded citizens of Falmouth and elsewhere to contribute to an endowment fund to be used to make gifts to charitable organizations that benefit the community. In 2019, we raised from the community, and we distributed a little over $100,000 to 50 organizations in Falmouth. Just to name a few of them: Arts Falmouth, Cape Cod Pride, the Falmouth VIPS, Woods Hole Library, the Falmouth Service Center, North Falmouth Elementary School District 300 Committee, People for Cats, and 40 other organizations. As a member of the board of the Woods Hole Foundation, it's a very nice thing to be able to sit on the board and give away $100,000 that has been raised by the community. Since 1976, an endowment of about $2 million has been raised. So in 1993, the future of the Woods Hole Post Office was in question. It was owned by, I think, South Shore Bank. And in 1993, the Woods Hole Foundation purchased the Woods Hole Post Office. Cut to the chase. Very few people in Woods Hole know anything about the Woods Hole Foundation, let alone that they own the Woods Hole Post Office and maintain the Woods Hole Post Office in the last few years, and lease it to the Postal Service. In the last few years, we've installed solar panels, we've redone the air conditioning, we've redone the flooring, and in the next year, we're going to take out the fluorescent lighting and put in proper historic lighting to have there. So we would like to put up a sign, very much in the tradition of a National Register type sign, and the sign simply says, "This historic building is preserved by the Woods Hole Foundation." The outside of the building states very clearly it was built in 1928. The outside of the building makes it clear that it's a post office. Perhaps at some point we might do a brochure to give people more information about the post office, which I could do right now, but I won't. But it was built by a local entrepreneur, businessman, real estate person in 1928 named Walter Lusko, who owned and built a lot of the buildings in that area. So I think that's what I am going to apologize because we went ahead and made the sign, and that's because I was way behind in this project, and I felt like I really needed to get ahead, and I was told afterwards I shouldn't have done it, but we do have the sign here so you can see it. If you have a problem with the sign, I'm prepared to eat the cost of this and do another one.
Looks great. All set?
Yeah.
Is there any public commentary of 16 Water Street? We'll close public commentary. Any questions from the board?
Yeah. Does this conform with our guidelines?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's not unusual in a historic building to have a plaque like this. I think the only thing when I looked at it was just your location to me was unusual. I mean, usually you see a plaque like that either alongside the doorway, as people come in and see it, or maybe lower down. That was the only minor thing, but it just seemed like it was an unusual placement of it.
To address that, we took a mock-up of the plaque, and we put it in different places, and that seemed to be the most natural.
I was actually imagining a much larger sign.
Can you see it from?
Yeah, can you see it from there?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my
One member of there is vegetation there. One member of our board was with me when we did that, and and the bushes can be trimmed to keep them low. We didn't want to distract from the fact that it's a post office is the main use of the building. The main issue of the building is not that it's owned and maintained by the Woods Hole Foundation. That's sort of a secondary thing that we want people to have some idea about. So it's not, we don't want it to be the first thing that people see, but people who live in the community, over time, we believe they'll see it, and that it will strengthen the community, that people will not just think it's the post office there and it will always be there, but it's there because the community decided that they wanted to keep the post office in Woods Hole.
Any other question?
That's great.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
I move approval.
And second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next application is 19-54 Woods Hole Partners LLC at 533 Woods Hole Road. And before we get started, I have to make an announcement. For the public, the law firm presenting this application has sent a request to the town that I should recuse myself from this, excuse me, from this hearing based on things that the Historical Commission had reviewed over the last year. We got the letter, I consulted with the town council, he investigated the request, looked at all the issues, did his research. He came up with the conclusion that I did not need to recuse myself. He submitted that application to the State Ethics Commission, and they concurred with his decision, so I'm not going to be recusing myself.
Understood, and we appreciate you having taken time to look into that issue. For the record, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ahmed Clower Law Firm here in Falmouth, and I represent the applicants of Woods Hole Partners LLC. They're the owners of 533 Woods Hole Road. And they're here tonight to request a certificate of appropriateness to allow the redevelopment of the property.
Can you speak up?
Sure. The property at 533 Woods Hole Road is 5.4 acres, located about a quarter mile outside of Woods Hole Village. It contains the remains of the Nautilus Motor Inn, which was a 53-room hotel, as well as a geodesic dome located in the southwest corner of the site, which was created in 1953 by Buckminster Fuller. This property is zoned business redevelopment and is located partially within the Woods Hole Historical District. The applicant's proposing redevelopment of the existing decrepit site. This redevelopment would constitute 43 age-restricted condominium units, of which 39 would be market rate and 4 would be affordable. This would be a mixture of 2 to 3 bedroom units located in 7 buildings, which would constitute 5 duplexes, 1 multifamily building with 13 units, and 1 multifamily building with 20 units. Of those, 2 of the duplexes and the 20-unit building are located outside of the Woods Hole Historical District. So we're considering tonight our buildings B, C, D, and E, as well as the dome. As part of the redevelopment, the applicant is seeking to preserve and restore the dome, which was most recently a 170-seat restaurant. The dome itself has 2 additions, which is a kitchen wing to the northeast and an entrance wing to the northwest. They've commissioned a structural and historical analysis, and this was completed by Structures North Consulting Engineers. They're leading specialists in the engineering, rehabilitation, and restoration of historical properties. Members of that team are present and will speak this evening. A historical analysis was completed by Doug Kelleher of Epsilon Associates, preservation consultants. Doug has extensive experience in the preservation, planning, and architectural design review. He has served with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and he will be joining us this evening and will speak as to the appropriateness of the design, along with the architect, Kent Duckham. The applicant has engaged some of the best preservation talent available, and will continue to do so throughout this process. To understand this application, I think it's important to understand the history of the site. The first motel rooms were built in 1954, and that motel was run continuously until 2004 or so. The rooms were added in 6 phases from 1956 through 1980. The motel closed in 2004 and has fallen into complete ruin. Even prior to the current owner taking possession of it, it was simply not salvageable. A former owner had removed fixtures and pipes, and the motel had deteriorated to such a point that it was not going to be savable. The dome, while deteriorated, can and will be restored and preserved if this project is approved. As some may know, this property went through the permitting process in 2007 and 2008. So the previous owner entered into a covenant with the Woods Hole Community Association as part of a rezoning of this property to business redevelopment. That covenant agreed to 43 residential units on the site. At that time, the Historical Commission issued a certificate of appropriateness for one single large building with 43 units and common facilities, which is to be joined to the dome, and the dome was to serve as common space. That approved project did not move forward for a number of reasons. There was a pretty significant market downturn that started at the same time the permits were all received, and the cost of constructing such a large building with no opportunity to phase that project prohibited them from being able to continue. Woods Hole Partners have since purchased this, and have, since their purchase, have been engaged in designs, negotiations, and permitting of the site. Even prior to their ownership, they began discussions with the Woods Hole Community Association. After much compromise, the Community Association accepted a plan in line with their prior approval. A site plan with buildings designed substantially as before the board, allowing 43 units and 7 buildings, was presented to the Community Association and agreed upon. The covenant was amended, and a copy of that amended signed covenant was submitted to this board. The revised plan was likewise approved by the Cape Cod Commission, who extended their permitting through late 2024. Earlier this year, the applicant received approvals by the planning board under a site plan review process and a special permit from the zoning board of appeals. There are some design elements that are on the plans that are before you tonight, and changes that will likely result from this review that will require some modification on some level of these approvals. This is to say much has been achieved to this point, but there are considerable efforts will remain prior to the issuance of any building permit. The applicant seeks to preserve and restore the dome as a standalone structure. The entrance wing, which was built in approximately 1975, will be replaced with a new entrance, mirroring the original design, which is a small entry door with canopy and stone steps. A portion of the kitchen wing will be removed. The remainder of that wing will be used, preserved and reconfigured as a new accessible entrance. The dome covering, which currently is a combination of plexiglass, paint, fiberglass, and elastomeric coatings, is to be removed with a new translucent mylar installed over the frame consistent with the historical design of the building. The space around the dome will be publicly accessible gardens and walkways with space for outdoor art installations. The residential structures within the historical district and on the site as a whole have been designed as a modern interpretation of the late 19th, early 20th century shingle style, which is found in Woods Hole and elsewhere in Falmouth and on the Cape. Consistent with this style, the architectural elements will include wood shingle exteriors, broad sloping roofs, divided light window sashes, porches and column entrance porticos. The proposed buildings will not reduce the dome's view shed. Presently, there's a 135-degree view to and from the structure. That view will remain. The buildings have been designed that do not impede with that view. The applicants made a number of changes to this point in response to comments from the public, from the planning board, and from the zoning board of appeals. Building E, the building closest to the dome, has been reduced in size by altering and shrinking the floor plans. This resulted in a shift of the building further away from the dome, from 18 feet to 27 feet. The front yard setback likewise increased from 27 feet to 31 feet. This means that the entirety of the building is behind the present setback of the motel building closest to the dome today. The dome will remain the highest, on the highest part of the property, and the peak of the dome will remain the highest point. The buildings on the site today are ruined, they're eyesores, they're nuisances. The property is in terrible condition, and it'll be replaced with appropriate, attractive housing. The applicant will preserve the dome and properly restore it. The applicant has designed the development that will benefit the community as a whole. It bears mentioning that this board cannot and should not consider alternate possibilities for development of this property. This is the plan that's been submitted for consideration. and we feel it represents the best opportunity for preservation of the dome. There's no assurance that anyone else can or will rehab the site and permanently preserve the dome if this application were to be denied. No one else has the right or ability to seek to do that. I'm going to cede the floor to other members of our team. Doug Kelleher will speak to the historic aspects of the project. Kent Duckham will speak on the proposed construction. And the team from Structures North will speak to the dome. I believe Doug is running a little bit behind still. Oh, Doug is here. Doug, would you be able to speak first as to...
Sure, or I thought Kent did you want to discuss the...
Before we move on, Kurt, can you slide the screen down there? There's a Christian and Kara can see it all. It's blocked. I even blocked part of it for myself. We can just, no, can we shift the screen down about a foot?
Yeah, I don't set this up. IT does. I mean,
no, I think if you just shift the directory.
what are you talking about? Shifting this way.
That's it. That's it. That might just be enough, just so we can all see it. Now you can just shift the screen. Thank you. Thank you. Such a good presentation tonight. I don't want to miss anything.
So Kent Duckham, the architect on the project, is going to speak a little bit about the design of the... Kent, it's just signing right now.
Good evening. I'm Kent Duckham with Duckham Architecture Interiors. We've been working on this project for a little over a couple of years. We've tried multiple schemes leading to this particular design, which is the elements that are in the historic district are three two-family low Cape-style houses and one larger 15-bed as well as the building. The basic concept here is that we have some larger, and then there's another larger building that's out of the historic district that's the main building that sets the tone for the whole project. So the larger buildings are designed to be like seaside, summer, New England shingle style, turn of the century inns. So it's sort of rambling, multiple roof lines and gables, wells in this case, and 2.5-story with lively roof lines. In the foreground are the three smaller buildings in a little cluster, like a little village, and then there's the dome, which we'll get to separately. So the three smaller structures are low-slung, Cape-style roof lines with, this is building D is one of these that's set a little further back. Go to the next slide. Mostly, these are the views that you see from the street, which would be the back and side. Main features here are large windows, so play with the scale, make it seem smaller. When we were planning board, they did ask us to consider mixing up the materials a little bit, so there's some shiplap siding, there's some panels that maybe don't show on these drawings. So that it wasn't all just shingles, that it has a little variability, kind of village-like.
I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more specific on the materials, because that's more of what we're concerned with than the planning board was. So we're going to be more specific when we talk about those types of things, so don't kind of skim over anything.
Okay, so maybe we should just come back and focus on the materials after the overview. So then C and D thing there, shingled capes, low slung. These happen to be more with a garage under and some living space so that they can actually be down lower. It helps with the views from the buildings behind, but it also creates a low little village-like atmosphere as you view into the site from the entry. I suppose we can get in and then go to the next one. Building E. Building E is designed to be kind of a seaside inn that is a more formal pattern. It was actually a building that existed like this in Falmouth. I found in my research, which was an H-shaped plan, similar kind of roof lines and entry in the middle. Same thing here with various materials and wrapping around roof, a low roof line that gives it some nice scale. On this side, this is the side that faces the dome. Originally we had a lot more going on over here, with another gambrel facing this way. And we sort of steadily work to move away from the dome, simplify that facade as much as possible so that we have all the background to the dome. It didn't compete with the dome. So I can list out quickly what materials. So cedar siding, steam gray, gray to the weather. Trim, we'd like to use some synthetic materials like Laurel and Razek because they're long-lasting. They require minimum maintenance. It is a 55-plus community, so maintenance may be a long-term issue. Certainly all the buildings and the scale of the buildings, maintenance will be an issue. Fiberglass columns, asphalt roof, gutters and flashing, aluminum, white aluminum, basically a white and a gray building with a black roof. We have some renderings of that too. Decks would be mahogany with AZEK railings, terraces are bluestone, blocks of brick and bluestone, some sidewalks are concrete, and many of them will be brick and bluestone. We created these chimney elements in a few areas to try to combine all the ventilation and all the, just the functions of the building so that they weren't so randomly placed. They came out of chimneys. Most of the parking on the site is underground. It's under. The garage is under on the smaller buildings. It's underground on this building. You can see the garage there. And underground in the bigger building in the back. What are you looking for, Tim? On the dome, the version with the restoration of the kitchen wing. That's what came over in the application. That's the school. No, you might be, you might be both your building plans. Sure. drawings of the dome. The original dome, there's a kitchen wing in here that has a couple of additions put on it afterward. This is an addition. This piece here in the foreground is an addition to the wing. This piece was put on in 1975 as a bigger addition that sort of accommodated some other things, not original to the structure. You can see this part right here is original. This part is a later addition. This part's a later addition. This part's a later addition.
Are either of those the current entrance, or is that in another place?
So we have photographs and so on that Kevin Flower was showing you. That there used to just be a door and a little canopy here. We intend to put that back just the way it was. It's complicated because when they did this, they damaged the dome in that area, so that's going to have to be rebuilt back to its original. We actually have some archival photos that I think give us some clues as to how that was structured correctly. This is the entry edition that we want to remove, the 1975 edition. This is the original, and then that's a later edition there. So that original entry we want to remove and put it back as a little pavilion entrance like this, which we have photographs and so on. We can put that together pretty easily. The kitchen wing is much longer, and we would like to scale that back to a size that makes sense for what the proposed use will be, and then restore it to its original condition. So the original materials were a concrete block, a modular panel system with modular glass and modular panels. So it's all based on a module, roughly 44-inch module that we can have. I think they might have a better handle on that. It's certainly covered in asbestos panels, so I think we can remove the asbestos panels and put plywood panels back in their place, repeating the panels. And then go back down. So this is the original kitchen wing had a concrete block and wall like that. There's still elements of it in there. We would like to penetrate that wall with an entry and a canopy. The canopy would be matching this canopy that's a reproduction of what was originally there. The dome will be restored to its original condition, which actually was wrapped in mylar, the sheer mylar, which is just a thin plastic coating. Mylar. There was no consideration for energy conservation or even longevity at the time. It was probably a heavier grade mylar than that, but I can imagine it was built by architecture students. They might have just gotten their roll of mylars out and put it on.
Now, which of those two will be considered a main entrance, or both?
This is the main entrance. We're turning the kitchen room into
Main entrance.
and it's oriented toward community parking and access. And then this will be a secondary entrance, but it could be the main entrance. This one's accessible, but this one not.
What would be the end use for the building?
We haven't opened the public.
Oh, sorry.
Is this a clear, I'm sorry, is this a clear product, or is it got a opaque, what's going on?
There's some photographs in there that, as best we can tell from the photographs, it looks like it was translucent. Mylar, and then probably plexiglass for the windows. It subsequently got Okay, so here's a pretty good idea of what it was originally. And you can see the structure through here. You can see translucent. You can see through the structure, but you can't really see into it. And then the glass areas are much more transparent.
Is the Mylar the white on top, or is it?
So in this picture, in order to manage sunlight and keep it cool, they have parachute.
Oh,
That's a parachute, or a big piece of fabric on ropes, and they could pull it one way or the other depending on the path of the sun, and, try to cool it off a little bit.
Could you point, you said there's plexiglass and Mylar, and can you point out where?
So here's a window element right here,
Yeah.
and if you look, study it for a moment, you can see that that's more transparent than this part here, which is all Mylar.
I see.
The Mylar looks like it went on in strips, like off of a roll, like that, right here. There's a strip of Mylar, and then these are little wooden battens that secure the Mylar onto the structure. It could have gone in different ways, but it would have to be very, straight runs. I think this is a pretty good idea of what it probably was right here.
What would have been under the Mylar? Just open, just the structure itself, the wooden structure, the frame?
Just the wooden frame, standalone, skin with something as simple as that. It was a very lightweight structure. I don't think it was meant to last as long as it has. It just shows you that geodesic domes are long-lasting. It's going to need a lot of restoration work. It's racked a little bit, maybe from hurricane, force winds, and so on. There's a lot of decay. Pieces need to be sort of methodically replaced or improved. There's a couple of areas of failure that are going to have to be possibly rebuilt. But you can see here's our pavilion right here, with bluestone and flagstone entrance, so that's what we intend to do there. We will go as far as putting a parachute back on it. I think that'd be kind of cool to do. I think we'd have to get out and maneuver it. There's that entry again. See, there's a glass section here. Here's the kitchen there in the background. But we intend to scale it back to about here. This is prior to the couple of bad additions that they put on it, so there is an addition here now if you went out to look at it, and there's an extension on the back here. And you can see there the modular system that they employed. These are more current, so you still have that little entry, but now they put some kind of elastomeric rubber roofing or something on it to make it more energy efficient and probably long-lasting. It still must have the battens in there because I think that's what this is. So we just coated it in, some kind of a liquid-applied or maybe a membrane-applied system. So when we scale it back, we're scaling it back to here. This being a later addition, so we're coming back to this point. You can see there more of the window elements are looking out the glass.
And your entrance would be through a lower level, and then go upstairs or something?
Yes, so the grade comes down here. This is a high point. The grade comes down. Parking would be down over here, community parking. It's also an amenity to the owners in the complex. then there's a ramp for accessibility that would come up and enter in the end here. So you can see there was originally a concrete block wall here that ended it. There's another one over here that ended it, so it kind of frames the structure that's in between. So we just intend to do the same thing, just shorten it. This was somewhere along the line. This was pretty bad shape. Some point, I don't know if it was original, maybe Doug knows, they put in some blue plexiglass, so that's what you see there. Any other questions?
So your plan would be that there still would be windows, plexiglass windows, not glass, plexiglass?
Nice to make it glass.
No, I'm just asking,
Yeah.
what your plan is.
Do we know what they, John,
Yes.
do you have any idea truly what it was originally built with, plexiglass or glass?
We believe it was a tension structure, to the best of our knowledge, but there isn't a lot of documentation. Doug, you got a question
Right.
on that?
Well, I was just going to say that the existing framing that supports the plexiglass is inadequate for supporting
Right.
glass previously or in the
I
future.
didn't raise glass, I just asked what you're doing.
Right.
Just asked the question of what your plan was
Going forward with
to
the
put
plexiglass.
there.
It can be plexiglass, it's not going to be an energy efficient building. It wasn't built to be an energy efficient building. It's a very lightweight structure. It stood the test of time, so I think if you put back what it was, it's going to be pretty good.
So you propose, let's just say plexiglass, so you would still have windows. You put a Mylar back onto the frame, and then you're proposing to put a parachute type thing over it again, as it has now?
As best we know, that's how it was built and used in the early stages.
Well, the parachute wasn't part of the structure, that was put on there for a reason. And just that's my question, I don't understand the parachute thing.
It was used to, sorry, it's John, construction, but it was used to try to dull some of the light because of thermal heating.
The light.
So I think it was basically kind of an experimental structure, and so it's going to be partly driven by what the occupancy is. There are a bunch of different factors. I think we're trying to secure its preservation, and then we're going to adapt, to best suit. Structure's basically saved when somebody can flip a switch and the lights go on.
Yeah, I guess I'm
And that's
just trying to get
really
to the
why
point.
we're trying to,
If you're gonna restore the original structure, I mean, I understand the purpose of, they threw a blanket over it because it was too sunny in there. I mean, I understand it. That doesn't mean you do the same thing. I think we want to understand a restoration first, and then if there's an issue, then how you might address that. Maybe you do it internally, I don't know.
We
You
considered a lot
some
of
kind of
options.
shade, I don't know. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we're restoring the dome, and why the parachute? That's not a restoration to the original
Parachute's
structural.
optional.
That's my point, that's my.
But, if we're gonna have a structure that really has no energy efficiency and probably gets baked by the sun, I think you're gonna need the parachute, and probably have the parachute arrive because they realized that, it was hot and bright. Not built to the restaurant, so I'm sure it was a challenge.
I think it's important that we understand what it's gonna look like.
It's gonna look like a better version of what it is now. I mean, the best that we have is those older archival photos that we started with, that kind of go back to this. There's been a lot of research about how it's been put together. And we've explored other options, skinning it with other things and so on, and it just seems like it's all a stretch. Right now, the best thing is to just put it back where it is, restore it to its original condition, and live with the the challenges that are not being done really adequately at all. The use is mostly intended to be an amenity to the 43 condo owners. And it's been, it would be deeded that way in particular, but it also has some potential for opening up to the public, and there is some public parking. Parking limits how many people can come from the public, but there is some access. And we've made special effort to make sure that it's accessible access. And we would,
I know this, I just have a question. I know this is a unusual restoration, but have you had any preliminary conversation with the building inspector in terms of what kind of structural, what you're going to need for the permit, structural requirements? Sprinkler system is a sprinkler system you when that building is open to the public. Obviously, you have energy codes you have to meet, what you're going to be able to do. I'm just curious what your take is on a regular
historic nature of it, the capacity, how we meet the energy codes, and
all life safety.
but we meet all the codes in terms of accessibility and functionality and fireproofing. It's a safe building. Structurally, there's a whole team that's been working on how that's going to happen. So we'll look at it.
I was going to say, just in terms of completing the presentation, I think we should transition to some of the other team members who are going to speak to some of the things that I think will address the questions that the board is expressing already. So, do you want to finish?
On signing, please.
Don't go away, maybe. Again, my name is Doug Calver with Epsilon Associates. I've been assisting consulting on the project for a little over a year now, I guess, maybe longer. Just to recap some of the things that Kent discussed, I mean, obviously the intent of the design of the new construction is to be sort of in the spirit of the late 19th to early 20th century shingle style, with the use of cedar shingles, columns, broad roof lines, two divided windows. So that's really been the sort of the design guidelines that he's been sort of operating under in designing the new construction. The dome, I mean, it's important to note that the proposed work on the dome and the design of the dome, the improvements of the dome are really based on historic documentation that we have as far as the entrance. As Kent mentioned, the current entrance that's there today was widened. It's in the original location of the original entrance, but when they added it, they expanded it. The intent now is to remove that later entrance addition and basically restore the appearance of the original, basically fill it in, a little bit narrow it, as well as, exactly, go much smaller than what's out there today. Likewise, with the kitchen addition, the intent is to retain a portion of it and sort of bring back the original design intent of that, but remove the later additions and create that as sort of the accessible entrance. I mean, you asked which is going to be the primary entrance. I mean, the sort of recreated original entrance will appear as the entrance, but for all intents and purposes, the sort of accessible entrance will most likely be used the most. Again, as Ken said, the intent is to remove the farthest portion of the kitchen wing. Those of you who are familiar with the 2009 approval for the project, that approval included the complete removal of the kitchen wing, as well as the entrance wing, and connecting the new building actually physically to the dome itself. We believe the current proposal, keeping the dome as a separate independent structure, is more in the original intent of the design for the dome, and keeping elements such as the most original portion of that kitchen wing and recreating the original entrance is certainly more appropriate than what had been previously approved in 2009. With that, I think I'll pass it over to John Watney, Structures North. Structures North is the structural engineer who's been doing the analysis of the dome and looking at sort of its efficiencies and attributes. Oh, yes.
We're going to share our notes. Usually looking at a screen, so pardon me on notes. John Watney, President of Structures North Consulting Engineers in Salem, Massachusetts. We do about 250 projects a year. About 2/3 of those are in historic preservation. We're really excited to get this, to be involved in this project, and really hopeful that it will move forward because it's really structure in its purest form. And with me is Sarah Linnea, one of our rising stars in the office, and does all the things that I can't do, which is great. We're going to kind of jump into our analysis, initially survey of the existing structure, and then some thoughts. Sarah and Stephanie from our office and I all different and sometimes same times crawled around on this, and my first impression was like, oh my God, what a mess. But then when we started looking at it more closely, and then we read the texts, there was a gentleman, Bob Moore, who had done quite a bit of research with colleagues at MIT, and this was an offshoot of a MIT professor. And there were accounts of him being out here with his students, and as a structural engineering team, all we could imagine was the excitement. And so we went in with skepticism, yet optimism. And next slide, please. So our first step was to do a visual inspection of the structure. It's 65 years old, roughly. And in 65 years with, decades of abandonment, maybe shoddy maintenance, maybe there were periods when it wasn't anybody's favorite thing. We've got damage. The way it's built is it's a bunch of sticks and nodes, almost like K'NEX toys. And the sticks, if you push on them too hard, they either crush at the ends or buckle. We've analyzed them for that. Here's where a bunch of the sticks are coming in. Everything's in compression, typically. You can see some rot, and where they're kind of compressed and shifted a little bit. That means that the members get a little closer together. Next one, please. If you look at the outside, it's kind of obvious why you might get some rot. Overall, it's been fairly well protected, but you've got some isolated places where water has seeped in, and you kind of got focused areas of damage. Next, please. The other thing is that in the structural frame, you've got primary members, secondary members, intersecting members, and one thing that's interesting about the geometry is that they're rhomboid shapes, in that most of the domes were triangular, but these are kind of diamond shapes. So in the nature of it, you're actually warping some of the planes, but the way they framed it to support the skin, you're forcing some of the members into bending. And so there's a natural spring, which we actually had to kind of account for, and the first impression was like, gee, these things are kind of sagging, but then as we looked at it geometrically, they really were not. Next slide, please. The cladding, again, is a mess, and admittedly, I think the exterior cladding seems like it's a little bit of a work in progress. I think the structural frame is existing, and I think that's easy to mimic or save and where necessary, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the skin is kind of the wild card. It's going to be code-driven, it's going to be use-driven, but there's not a great deal of information about it. And again, this was built by structural engineers, not necessarily architects. So everybody built this structure, and then they're like, we need to protect it. And I think it's had several different methods of exterior. Next, please. And then the other thing is some of the connections have loosened up. They've got fabricated metal node fittings at the intersections, and those have loosened, and those would need to be tight. Next, please. Okay, so go back, thanks. So we ran an analysis, and Sarah's gonna talk about it briefly. The International Association of Shell and Skeletal Structures did an analysis, three-dimensional analysis of the dome. We actually ran our own analysis, which Sarah's gonna touch on. We actually came within, we looked at the overall deflections under similar loading conditions, and we came in within really 10 to 15, 20% of the most deviations between their analysis. So I think if you've got two agreeing analyses, we're probably, hopefully, pretty good. So, go ahead.
Right. So for analyzing the structure, this is not your typical everyday structure to analyze. We first started to look into how to model the dome, and then we found out this very nice gentleman modeled the dome in SketchUp and uploaded it online for free download. So we used that. And can you go to the next slide? And we uploaded it into a program that we use, is Rhino 3D. And it uses parametric designs to analyze, model and analyze the structure. So this is sort of all the algorithms that we had to use. Very confusing. And Karamba.
Not to Sarah.
No, but I mean, it looks very, very cool. And we use Karamba, which is like a plug-in to that to analyze it structurally. And you can see like all the members, all the main struts, and all the mullions that we had to model. And we calculated the dead load, snow load, and wind load, applied to everything to the model through Karamba, and it gave us visual results. And go to the next slide. This one, and the next one. So yes, can you go to the previous one again? So basically the global structure is in good shape, which obviously it's been standing for 60 years and with very little maintenance for the past few decades, and that's the beauty of geodesic domes. But because of rods, there were local repairs that had to be done. Some members have broken, some struts have broken, they had rotted ends, weak links, and so basically going forward, we would like to analyze it again after reinforcing, basically iterative analysis after reinforcing all the weak points. But it's generally stable.
Okay, well anyway, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
One thing that was interesting was that the other analysis had a deflection of, I believe, under dead load or, no snow, of about 2 inches, total deflection of about 4 inches, measured deflection of about 5 inches. We came out with very parallel results. However, the measured deflections, I don't know if they happened during snow conditions. It was probably unlikely, so that what they had thought was a 1 inch discrepancy between measured deflections and theoretical deflections. We came out, estimating maybe 3 inches, but then when you look at the actual compression stresses on some of the members, and then the deformations and the connections, it kind of makes sense intuitively. Now, we always look at things analytically, but then we also look at the big picture. And the fact is that this is a structure that was very cutting edge, and it's standing. 5 inches of deflection in something this size at this age under the conditions that it's lived on Cape Cod, it's really not a lot. So the plan going forward, can we go up a little bit, please? Is really, then we get down to the nuts and bolts. We'll take the skin off, we'll look at the existing numbers. We've looked at the number, everything from below, and so we can identify things that we know are bad. But chances are, once everything's exposed to the top, because rot does occur from the top down, we'll be able to look at every single stick and kind of intervene. But I think the gut feeling overall, though, is even though there will be surprises, and we always say in a project like this, the only surprise is when there's no surprise, it's standing. It's only deflected 5 inches, and small amount additionally. So we'll do this, an inspection, replace broken numbers in like kind, replace rotted numbers, then preservative treat existing numbers, and sadly the day of Cuprinol slathering, the green deathly fluid is gone, so we'll use a borate, which is environmentally friendly, then we'll tighten up the HUD connections. The other thing globally is that they did cut in the entrance, the main entrance, and that kind of shifted things around. So that's where, you know, Sarah and I will then, well, frankly, Sarah, because I don't know how to use it, but she'll rerun the analysis, and then we'll tweak a little bit more, and hopefully it'll be good for perpetuity. So, and then, what's next? Why don't you just, Sarah got to crawl around the kitchen.
Yeah.
And
What do you want to call around? So the kitchen wing has timber framing, floor framing and roof framing. It has concrete block foundation walls, wood studs, and Tectum composite panel decking system. Here's the floor framing and roof framing, I think. You can go to the next. So basically for the restoration, it's in good shape. The members are in very good shape. There's one problem, that is one tree growing over there, and the growing of roots is damaging the concrete masonry wall. You can see the cracks over there. It's close to the dome end of the kitchen. There's a brick chimney at the intersection of the kitchen wing and the dome. The brick masonry is in very bad shape, so it has to be removed and reset. Also, so where they put the kitchen wing, the opening at the dome that they made, they had a stud knee wall. That knee wall has rotted, is not in good shape, so that has to be restored as well.
So bottom, you know, just to summarize, you know, we're really excited about this. We would love the opportunity to have this project go forward, and because we don't get to work on these every day, and we will promise that it will be in good hands. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about the original structure itself when it was first constructed? Forget the restaurant issue, because we're not restoring a restaurant here, we're restoring a dome. Would it have had a covering?
Would have had to have a skin, yes.
Would it have to
Yes.
have a skin?
Yes.
You talking about parachute, or are you talking about plexiglass?
No, the plexiglass is really more dangerous.
What's that?
Mylar.
Was it open there? Was it?
No, it was not.
I don't think it was, it had a cover.
Plexiglass is just as I can tell, it's just for the window part that looks out forward. I'm not trying to do that. That's the only place the
Mylar were
plexiglass.
translucent.
Sorry?
The Mylar was translucent. There was a lot of light in it, but you couldn't really see.
But the idea of the plexiglass would have been as if a window, right? It's to mimic a window.
It was designed to have those triangular windows
Right.
around the base of the.
Right. So I guess I don't know if you're getting off the dome now, I think I don't want to leave the dome until we have at least a better understanding of what the intention is. When I say that you're saying you restore it, it's great to see that you have a strong feeling that you're able to structurally restore it, which is great. You know, what about the skin though? What's going over it? What is that going to be? There seems to still be a question mark as to what that is. I mean, is that still to be determined, or how are we leaving that?
I guess the short answer is, you know, is it going to have a parachute or is it not going to have a parachute or something like a parachute? The question is, we don't know. I mean, I think as the project advances and the design advances for the dome itself, and we start engaging MEPs and who give us guidance on how best to heat and cool it, you know, it may be that there's some covering that goes over it, like a parachute, or maybe, you know, that heat can be controlled internally with shades or through, you know, obviously mechanical systems. Short answer is, you know, we don't know at this point.
I think the crux of the matter is the restoration of the structure itself. And because nothing can happen in terms of covering until the structure is dissolved. And that can happen until the covering comes off. And then, and I think as Doug mentioned, as the project continues and as the, you know, as a base, we're talking about a Mylar. And then anything further than that, one, is still subject to this board's review. And two, would need to be resolved based on what's going to be the best practical use of material.
we actually also analyzed it and will be designing repairs for 10 pounds per square foot of any skin system, so that we'll have a fair amount of, you know, freedom as to what comes up for the long-range preservation of the structure.
So am I hearing that your feeling is that you won't know the answer to that until after restoration of the structure?
I think that's a pretty fair statement, yeah.
But it's
So that
intended to
remains an
go,
open item?
it's intended to go back to what it was at the outset. So there's older photographs show a Mylar system, glass windows.
So I think one of the issues is that what was built is in conflict with modern day codes.
Yeah.
And then you've got usability issues, and there is not a great deal of information on the archaic experimental skin that was on it originally. And so it's like threading a needle, and so we really want to, it's something that is going to take additional research. And I think we need to just get off the mark here to at least know that we should advance to the next level and do that research, and it will be something that's appropriate and obviously has your approval.
We've considered other materials so far, but they're all thick and heavy, insulated panels, things like that, that I think would substantially change the outcome and the original character. So after looking at a number of different things, it just seemed like the best thing would be to put it back the way it was, try to deal with the energy efficiency in the HVAC system. I kind of like the parachute as a, you know, low-tech solution to managing heat and sun.
It's kind of like trying to make a sailboat that drives down the road. That's the issue, you know. And so it's,
You made reference to the plan that was approved in 2009. Did you happen to look at what their restoration plan was for a covering?
Well, I can answer that because I did the permitting at the time. Bob Arment, I can sign it in for you. Interestingly, the 2009 decision left all of these issues unanswered for the same reasons. They didn't know the answer and felt, and what the Historical District Commission at the time referred to was I think it was a 10-point plan prepared by architect Deacon Marble, who was an expert on the structures. And there was a set of steps of inquiry of how to get the answers, but the answers were not included in the decision.
To elaborate on that, it was Deacon Marble had 14-point plan, which we have submitted with other permitting, and we'd be happy to submit to this board as part of the record as well. We've given you essentially both of our presentation. We'll be happy to address questions you might have, or comments, or whatever the board's pleasure
If
is.
you're done with your presentation, then we'll see if there's any public commentary. Is there any public commentary? Now, I mean, before we start, I just want to put some parameters around public commentary. You know that our purview is, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, it is just the three buildings, the duplex buildings in the front, the unit, I guess it's building E, is that the?
If you want to pull up the site plan, which is the last.
Okay, building E and the dome.
Page of this.
That is, those are the buildings that
I know,
are.
even just when you have the presentation.
Yeah, that's within the purview of the historical
The last page
commission
of this.
tonight, so we will not address anything outside those parameters. We also do not talk about use, so we are, if you'll notice, we do not talk about use of the dome. We don't talk about things that other boards get involved with, like the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, so we will not get into those. So I would please ask you to refrain any comments that are in those fields that have nothing to do with us, for the sake of the audience. With that, any, Oh,
These three duplexes,
Right.
this building here, and the dome itself.
Right. So if you have questions, you would please either make your comment, or if you have a question, you would address it to the board, and then we will get it from you. You don't engage with the presenters.
And then the line is running for both.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any public commentary? Anybody wishing to? John? If you could give your name for the...
Jonathan Goldman. I'm here today as a private citizen, town Falmouth, who do not speak for any other organization or institution. I reside in Woods Hole, approximately 300 feet from the Nautilus property. I've been interested in the preservation of the Dome building in particular for some time, in the interest of preserving our historic resources and this extraordinarily important structure in the history of American architecture. It is a singular example and the oldest extant example of Buckminster Fuller's geodesic forms. I also bring you regrets from my wife, Nicole Goldman, who sat on this commission, as you probably know, for 7 years, but cannot be here today as she's tending to a sick friend in D.C. She knows the care that this commission takes as they review all the projects, and that you have clear guidelines and priorities to which you will adhere. She's also been counseled to refrain from making public statements on this matter as a complaint against her for an alleged conflict of interest at the State Ethics Commission, like the one Chairman Petta mentioned, as filed by the attorneys for this developer, has not yet been resolved. So she remains hamstrung by their aggressive tactics of silencing her here. The property the Dome sits on, being primarily within the historic district, has been researched and studied extensively. It has been written about in numerous books and journals. It has been rarefied, copied, and developed upon for its unique new vision. Gunnar Peterson, who had built this original property and who commissioned Buckminster Fuller at the time, commissioned it as a restaurant. That's what it was originally intended to be. So, although I'm not talking about the intent, historically, that's what happened. It did not escape our notice that the developers chose to bring this to you well after the summer residents had gone to minimize oppositional voices. This is unfortunate since there are many in the community who should have that voice. The presentation put forth from the developer brings up several specific issues. One, I note that the Structures North report consistently cites an IASS team, the International Association of Shell Structures. Fuller was known as one of the originators of tensegrity structures, tensile structures, things that are under pressure because they are tense, basically. It was not an IASS team that put the papers together that were submitted for this application. The papers are the work of architect Bob Moore from Rhode Island, a colleague of mine, who independently studied the structure and who represented these papers by himself at the IASS conference in 2018. Please note, however, that the developer specifically refused the IASS conferees access during the conference, though this was requested repeatedly by Mr. Moore, several months in advance. 2, it is therefore notably strange that Structures North would use the articles presented at IASS as the gospel of professionalism, since they wouldn't even allow them to visit the site. 3, I'm pleased that they, regardless of where they gained their information or whom they appropriately or inappropriately attributed the information, have recommended the preservation of the dome structures, the brick fireplace, and the majority of the kitchen wing, all of which are historically important on many different levels, as has been articulated here 4. It is significant to note that the applicant then submits Mr. Moore's presentation as part of the application under the heading Supplementary Technical Reports. I believe it is misleading to present this information as their own. 5, the plans. This is a commentary. Building E is too close to the dome and robs this historic structure of the prominence and dominance as is mandated in the historic district bylaws that most significant historic buildings on the site has dominance and not be subordinated by other structures. Building E should either be radically reduced in size or preferably omitted altogether. What is the actual material of transparent Mylar? Because what we just saw was drafting Mylar, was something that architects used to draw on. When Fuller covered the original dome in Mylar, it was a brand new material from DuPont. And he was somebody who was very much interested in the current technologies, and that's what he was doing. It lasted 1 year until Hurricane Betsy? No, not Bob. Carol tore it to shreds. Okay. The subsequent rhomboids of fiberglass, pink and green, for that time, makes sense, were built to replace that. The building has always leaked, and as an essential first building, first articulation of Fuller's concepts, who was primarily a mathematician, this articulation was a quintessential starting point. Yes, experimental, but more importantly, it was a vision thing. And this was an opportunity made possible by Gunnar Peterson, a local modernist, to build. Because it's very important to understand what the transparent Mylar, which is being proposed for the covering of the dome, is. When the structure was built in 1953, the Mylar cover they used only lasted a year and was ripped to shreds in Hurricane Carol in August 1954. What type of permanent material, Mylar or otherwise, is suitable now? Since that time, there have been so many different advances in tensegrity structures that to not even present that as a possibility, to go back to the original idea that Fuller had, which failed dramatically, is unconscionable to me. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Historic does not necessarily mean putting it exactly the way it was. At its essence, the dome was an evolutionary concept, which I would argue today, if you read his books, he had a vision of the future. It was a humanistic vision. He built the first domes because he wanted an inexpensive way to multiply homes for people very inexpensively. You didn't need scaffolding. Nobody needed scaffolding to build this. They just climbed it, as you can see from the photographs, the historical photographs at the Woods Hole Museum. There's a lot of this information. The design of the condo buildings, while in keeping with other more traditional buildings in Woods Hole, are not in keeping with the design of the site. The site, so critically important to Fuller, his positioning of that dome as the dominant architectural feature for that site, for its views of Little Harbor, of the sound in the distance, and as a kind of a prominence, not unlike the dome at MIT, where there's a head. You know, these are people who are smart, and I know that this is a kind of an odd connection, but that is what the architecture was about. Okay, so it's not, they are not in keeping with the design of the site, which is mid-century modern American. The dome is the precedent-setting style on the site, and any buildings replacing the existing motel would follow suit. The design and the scale of the 20-unit building, Building A, is particularly offensive, particularly in the residents of Fern Lane, which sit directly behind it, overshadowing and overpowering that neighborhood with a massive structure, blocking the sun, casting shadows, and is tremendously out of scale with the neighborhood.
Not our purview.
Each of the points I outlined, that's because it's Building A?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for that. Each of the points I outlined, the requirement and the most important building on the site become the dominant focus. The subordination of the dome, if Building E is created as is, the need for a permanent successful material as a covering, not bringing back a failed material that historically only lasted 1 year, the incongruity of the design with the site, the incongruity of the buildings with the rest of the neighborhood, and the entire Woods Hole Village design with their massing and the overscaling must be taken up individually by the commission. It appears to me that the developers have done little of their own work, particularly in considering the dome and how to approach its design. I trust you will closely adhere to the established guidelines of this commission for this project as you would for any other that comes before you. And I submit this for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Any other public commentary?
I'm Nan Schonbacher, I'm Scott Clean. I have a
Could you
question.
stand up so everyone could hear, please?
I have a question, which is, the comment was made somewhere in the middle of this presentation that this was going to benefit the community of Woods Hole. I would like somebody to explain to me how any of that monstrosity serves the community. Even the dome restoration, they're saying it's dedicated primarily to the residents that will purchase these units, and they'll allow the public in. I happen to live in a place where the dome is right in the center of my view, and yes, the crumbling Nautilus is an eyesore at the moment, but what they're proposing to put up is going to fill my view and will be a worse eyesore, as far as I'm concerned, than what's currently there. I agree completely with John about the scale of this project. It's huge, it's overwhelming, it is not in keeping with the history of the site, and it's of no benefit whatever to the village of Woods Hole. It has nothing to do with Woods Hole, except adding people and adding traffic. It's not for the benefit of Woods Hole.
Thank you. Sir?
You talking to me? My name is Roger Day. I just wanted to add
Sorry,
one.
Roger?
Day.
Got it. Thank you.
The Mylar is perhaps something that should be reconsidered because the original top was Mylar. And the problem was not so much that it blew off, but that it made the entire structure into a huge oven. Because the sun came in and the heat could not escape. So that may well be just ill-advised on the face of it.
Thank you.
My name is Becky Connors. I represent the Reader Realty Trust. We are the closest adjacent neighbor to this proposed development. And I support the Reader Realty Trust, supports the development of this. Talking about the benefit to Woods Hole right now, Woods Hole is a very small community. There's not a lot of housing, especially in the summertime when the tourists descend. And this development would actually bring more people into the village of Woods Hole, helping the restaurants that are there, helping the community in whole. And you do argue with me that we have different points of view. However, I am very close with a number of the restaurants in Woods Hole that struggle in the winter. And having people there that aren't just transient, that are going to live there, would benefit the tax basis for the city or the town. It would benefit all the restaurants. And the current monstrosity that is there is not only an eyesore, but it's starting to become dangerous. There are kids up there partying. There's going to be a tragedy there. and we are in support of this development. It has been very well planned. We've been, discussing a number of things. He's been very receptive to changes that have been requested, and so I just want to vote our support for.
Can I just
Let me just
respond for a
clarify,
moment?
sorry, let me just clarify a point that's come up. As far as the use of the land and the density of the land, that's already been approved by other boards. So we don't get involved in that, so the planning board and the ZBA have approved density and use. Our purview now is purely with design and obviously for the historical integrity of the dome, which is a prime concern of ours. So I just want to clarify, because I know sometimes there's confusion when there's large projects as to who does what. So I just wanted to clarify that point. So we're not determining whether this project should be there or how many buildings there should be or can there be there, because that's already been pre-decided. So I just wanted to, for your own information. So,
my name is Mark Cody. I am actually the closest to development. I live on Fern Lane, 133 Fern Lane. And I'm sorry, we're late to being engaged. It's Woods Hole is a sleepy scientist town. It's a summer town, but we do pay taxes. But we're not here to fight this. We're not here to organize. We're up on this Cape just for 6, 8 weeks, 8, 10 weeks. To do a knock 'em down, drag 'em out with a developer during the off season, it's brutal, but it can be done. And unfortunately, I think the message to Woods Hole on this one is we're going to have to fight harder and organize better going forward. The development itself, the buildings they're up there right now are dangerous. I've got kids, I've got dogs. It is dangerous up there. We definitely need to tear it down, and I don't know so much about the dome itself and the historical value of that building. But I hope that this commission comes up with a solution that works for everyone, including the abutters. And I asked the developer, who I'm sure is here, okay, to reach out to us on Fern Lane, because you will be going up over the tree line. Again, all the folks in Harbor Hill, everyone on Fern Lane in the valley, will want assurances or want to work with you in coming up with something that works.
thank you.
I'm Michael Goldring, and I'm the closest residential abutter. This is my house here. And I'm also the only full-time resident of Fern Lane. So I've been dealing with, I've been there a very long time, so I've been dealing with the uncertainty about the development of the project that has been going on for over 10 years. So I don't have comments about appearances or materials, but I have the comment that I want to see something happen there so that it starts and then ends, because I've been living with this issue and the anxiety of it for over a decade. And so I think there will be some improvement when the property is developed. And so my basic comment is, I want to see something happen, and I want to see it start and then end.
Thank you. Any other public commentary? I'm going to close the public commentary. I'm going to open it for the board now. Any questions, commentaries for the presenters?
In terms of the dome, it looks like we have a commitment to see it restored to its original state. Well, I mean, I'm just saying what I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand what the original state is. I understand the presentation, and I've seen other presentations about the structure, the wood structure. I'm not hearing clarity on the covering. What in 1954 really was that material? Is it the same as it is now? Some of the questions that Mr. Goldman had. And I think I, for one, would want to see this happen. I do. I just don't have any clarity on what it's going to look like. whether it's gonna have this white, I mean, this is what you're saying, is you really don't know, right?
I think there are several issues. It leaks tremendously. It's a non-planar structure, so if you stretch something over it, it's, you know, that's was kind of the original solution. It didn't necessarily work, so I don't think it would be a question of, because you'd always have intersecting surfaces. So one of the design challenges is how you have each surface material intersect with, because a typical roof, you'd have like a standing seam, or you'd have some kind of a visible joint, which then would take away from the architectural appearance from the exterior. So that's, you know, the needle that we need to kind of thread. I mean, history goes back 50 years, and so if the original only lasted 10, we could even look at kind of a subsequent solution and still be historically appropriate, depending upon the period of construction that we interpret. And so I think that's where we are, you know, and we're not going to just tell you, oh, gee, we have all the answers, because we don't. We have the expertise required to figure it out. But I think, and it's going to take a lot of investment to do that, and I think we just need to get off, you know, go and then pull that together when we have some positive momentum here, you know.
I mean, I think we understand that, it's come clear. I think before we can finalize anything, we need to have a solution. And it may not be the exact solution, if not at least a plan of how we're gonna find the solution. Okay? I think John Goldman did bring up a couple of good points. If there was thin mylar on there that blows off, because it was there the first time doesn't mean that's the right thing to put back.
Right.
I think the historic significance of this structure is the dome itself. It's the struts, you know, it's not what covered it. You know, I hope it would be nice if you didn't have a covering so you could see the dome. That's really, to me, is the greatest value, but unfortunately you have to. You gotta put something on it. So I would try to be as creative as possible in coming up with, I'll call that the secondary problem, which is how do I cover this? The historic structure is the dome, which sounds like you're doing a great job in evaluating how you're going to restore that. So that's the good news. It's just like, how do I finish off the party here?
I think the question would be for the commission then, how much leeway do we have? Because anything that's not either the Mylar or the fiberglass is outside of what would be considered historically appropriate.
To come back and say, well, we're going to put back on something on there that originally was there that's going to blow off in a year. I mean, we can't accept that.
Well, we
So
wouldn't, not
we're
on
not
our watch
asking
either.
you for that.
Mr. Haddad, if I can interject, I think what John's trying to ask, and I think it's the question I want to ask, is would the board, in this situation, consider potentially approve newer materials, given some of the points Mr. Goldman raised, some of the points the board has raised, some of the points our engineers have raised? This is a situation where perhaps what we would consider historically appropriate materials for the board's purview might be the more appropriate materials to use. So something newer in technology, newer in design. You know, we've been trying to, in our internal discussion, saying, you know, the historical commission typically looks for this material, this material. So, you know, understanding each application is different, and this is the most unique historical application I've worked on. And perhaps you can't answer this question in this moment, but would the board consider allowing for newer materials that might be of more modern design that could potentially address this issue?
I think the answer is definitely yes. I mean, you see
That's
solar
very helpful.
panels on historic houses now. I mean, when they were built, it wasn't intended to have solar panels on them, but they do, you know, because you have to recognize things change. Now, this is not a historic house, we know that, you know, and it's a mid-century era structure. So I think with innovation there, it's an innovative structure. So I think if you came back with innovative solutions, I think that actually fits in what that structure represents.
Okay, so technically it would be an aesthetically appropriate modern intervention to preserve an historic frame, which is really what's being applied.
If you
for.
said you were putting plastic poles in the middle to put the dome on, I say, well, that's not appropriate. But you know, you're going to secure the dome, which is the prime structure here, and this unique covering, which we hear is problematic, it's been problematic for 45 or 65 years.
From the campus,
You
actually.
know, if you can say, gee, there's new technology that solves the problem and satisfies the restoration of the dome and still provides a aesthetically pleasing focal point for the town, well, that's what we're here for. That lasts more than a year. That's it. We're all ears for that.
So my reaction was that there was a 14-point plan, or there was a plan in place to do it. The restoration of this is going to be evolutionary. If any, you know, like you said, you get into the structure and then you start to uncover things, and that's understandable. But I think it would be good to have a plan as to how that process is going to happen, and so that we can at least have a document that says, you know, what is the actual plan of restoration.
We kind of have it in our report as bullet points.
Okay.
You know, we're going to address these things, and you're basically, I mean, this is what we do every day. We're doing surgery, and they're always on-the-spot decisions. So we actually have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. But I think we could be a little bit more specific, perhaps, if that's would be helpful.
It's not like the word, do we want it to be, not even want, is it more appropriate for it to be clear, or is it more appropriate for it to be clear with a parachute over it? Do you know when the parachute was put over it? It sounded like early on, you thought.
Very early.
Seems very early.
Yeah.
You know, John?
No.
So
You
like
said,
what?
do you know?
Oh, I do know.
Oh,
I thought you said no, I can't
I
tell you.
said, do you know?
Yeah, they used it was a total, this thing was a total seat pants thing. They
Just
got,
give me the answer.
the answer is that they found a surplus parachute, and they would have the waiters going on the outside to pull the thing around. I mean, it was
But the
ridiculous.
point is that the parachute was not original. Original
No.
was a Mylar
Reaction.
that didn't work. So if you, at that time, Mylar was a innovative new material.
And nobody knew about it.
And it didn't work. So if you come up with an innovative material that's current, that works, that's the right thing to do.
What I'm getting down to though is they're asking us, you know, kind of how much leeway we can give them to use innovative materials. Do we want them to have the white parachute? Do we care?
I don't think we tell them. I think what they're saying is that they're gonna look for the best solution. If they can't find one, their fallback might be what's there today, which is a parachute, which is a stopgap measure. Because that's what it was used for when it was put over the Mylar that didn't work, or
You have to get
the
to that
Mylar.
point first.
Right,
Yeah.
but so let them, I would say that they do their best research and come up with the best solution they can using modern material. If I can't believe in the world today that there's not a solution out there. Yes, it might be today's material, that's okay, because the structure is still preserved. And if anything, it might be preserving it better. That's our concern.
We don't want
We
something
don't
that's
want
gonna go
something-
on, that's
Exactly.
historic and then leak.
And then it blows off next year, and then
And
there's
quite
nothing
honestly,
there.
the applicant has no interest in doing something that's not gonna work, because then it has to get fixed.
Exactly, so I guess if that's the answer you're looking for, it's yes.
So I think we've covered that.
Okay.
I think we know what we need to do
Okay.
internally, so I think we have a
Okay.
question for that particular, we have an answer for that particular
Okay,
question.
so I think it sounds like the restoration of the structural part of the dome is under control. You've got the answers, you know what needs to be done, and you have a plan to do that. Sounds like the last part of it is certainly the covering, and you need more research on that.
I wanted to see if the board was comfortable with the removal of the two appendages, or the cutback of the kitchen wing, as well as the removal of the entrance appendage from the replacement with the more historical.
Yeah. My particular is, I'm okay with it. You're modifying, you're not taking it away completely, you're modifying it. If anything,
But it's in keeping more in what was their original.
yeah, there's some new additions. It probably shortened it a bit. Fig Tree, the kitchen wing is what the historic importance of that building is, it's the dome. So, like I said, if you were taking it away, say you're changing the look of it, you're just modifying it. So again, I don't have a.
Just trying to make sure we cover.
Based on how it was presented to us. And I don't know if anybody else has any different feeling. Sure. Is it a comment to that question?
No, it's a comment. No one has brought up the scale of building E. And
Well, we haven't gotten to those buildings yet.
Okay.
We haven't gotten to those
All right.
yet. Okay.
I mean, you could tint the plexiglass on the top.
That's their,
Okay.
that's their mission to find the solution.
I still think.
I just think that they've done a crackerjack job with, the effort on the restoration of the dome. I think they've got a great team. I think that they're doing a good job of paring it back to the original and recognizing the intent of the structure. And, there's Herculean task to bring it to occupancy. But the dome is such a small part of the project.
Right.
But, we're spending an inordinate amount of time because, I think that there's still some unanswered questions on it. But this is, the main focus of the presentation. It's a main focus of the conversation and everything. And, the point that it is on the hill, I think the idea of getting from the parking up there is going to be a big challenge on the site. I think there's a number of things. I think it's actually a nice detail of making what was the primary entrance, accessory entrance, and having a more logical circulation from the, on the site. It seems, very steep up on a promontory, but, it's plausible. But, I think that the conversation, you don't have the answers to something that's really tertiary to the big picture. The membrane of the dome skin, that's going to come out in the wash. That's pretty small potatoes. If you want to reference down just past the Church of Messiah on Church Street, we approved green roof. And we never even talked about the membrane that was supporting the green roof. It wasn't even in the conversation. But a flat green roof was approved. And so there's a lot of things that are proposed that we approve. And, it's a roofing material, and we approve a lot of roofing materials.
So I think we're done with the conversation on the dome, or at least for right now. I guess the last question on the dome, though, I know there was correspondence with Mass Historic. I'm not quite sure what was going on with what Mass Historic's involvement is, but they have asked you for information. Is that being supplied?
So, one, I'll let Doug speak to this more largely, but part of the Cape Cod Commission decision requires a preservation restriction on the dome, which would be done through Mass Historic. But other than, beyond saying that,
Would it be done what? I'm sorry.
I believe that's done through Mass Historic. I know just enough about Mass Historic to get myself in trouble, so I'm going to defer to Doug.
Well, the state will have to, the Mass Historical Commission will have to approve the preservation restriction, as will the Falmouth
Well,
Historical.
there is no preservation restriction right now.
But there is
There
going
has
to
to
be.
be.
There will be.
There will be.
But I'm asking about, the Mass Historic is involved with preservation questions, and I guess I'm not understanding what that was all about.
So
Have you responded, either way, have you responded to their inquiries?
So what's triggering the Mass Historic's review of the project is the work that's being done down on Woods Hole Road, which is, this portion of it is state highway. So the project requires a permit from Mass DOT. So that state action triggers Mass Historic's regulatory review of the project. As Kevin was saying, aside from that, Cape Cod Commission reviewed the project. A condition of that is the placement of a preservation restriction on.
That's after the fact. I mean,
After the fact,
that's
right.
after the fact.
Right, and Mass Historic will also need to approve the preservation restriction. As far as, have we responded to Mass Historic? We have. Their last sort of response from them was, basically what's the status of your local, permits and approvals? So,
Can I get a copy of your response to your questions? Can I get a copy from this board?
Sure,
Get a copy of
sure.
that?
You would have been, yeah, I believe you were CC'd, but we can certainly
No,
send you
I
a
don't
copy.
think we were.
Okay, we can certainly send that to you.
So can we move on to the other buildings now, building E, and then was it A, it's not B, C, D?
B, C, D.
B, C, D. I think when I read some of the letters about the logic behind this, they talked about the Woods Hole community and the uniqueness of Woods Hole, and I think you're 100% right there. It's probably the most unique of Falmouth villages, as far as its character. I don't think I could go down any street in Woods Hole and see all the buildings with the same architectural style that I saw there. So I was a little disappointed in not seeing a little more variety between especially the smaller, the three duplex type buildings. Architectural differences being even a garage door or some kind of trim or some differences, like I said, that would be more reflective of what I would expect to find in Woods Hole. I did not see that at all. I found that a little bit, it's a little bit hard, I know, looking at a flat presentation with building E. It looked very flat to me, but I know it's hard to really see. Especially the back, you said you took away stuff, it looks like an institutional building there. I was surprised to see that, to be honest with you. The only buildings in Woods Hole that look like that are institutional. So, if that's what you're trying to mimic from Woods Hole, I'm surprised, but, Ted just made the comment that you took things away. I guess the question is why, whatever was there before.
Part of it was in an effort to move the building as far away from the dome as we could. We didn't, part of the conversation with the planning board and the zoning board was some expressed concern over the relative spacing of the building, the dome. So we managed to move it away 9 feet, an additional 9 feet. So we increased from 18 feet to 27 feet. But the victim of that shift away from the dome was some of those details that would have been some jogs and details that would have been on the rear side of the building. I think it's also important to note that really what's going to be seen and viewed is up a pretty substantial pitch. The primary view is going to be of the end of the building, and the depth of the building won't be seen nearly as much, or won't be nearly as visible. So what people are going to see is the architectural details on the end of the building. That'll be what's most visible because of the pitch of the road and the pitch of the hill.
There were also concerns about the architecture where the dome is, competing with the dome. So we worked to simplify and make it more of a background, at least in that area, so that the dome in the foreground would be what you really see.
And this is the particular view that would be seen from the street, and really what would be seen is the upper portions of it.
There's a large
Well,
grade
again,
change there
that's
also.
just my perception. It just lacked a little variety and architectural detail of uniqueness that you normally find in Woods Hole. There's no street that looks all the same in Woods Hole, as architecturally style-wise. It's very eclectic, and that's where the charm is in Woods Hole. So I see that missing here. But again, that's not the building. Those are details, that I think are easy to think about and look at.
And we have some renderings, detailed renderings of the street view, and I think that'll be really instructive as to what will actually be seen and the details that would be visible.
What is do you know what the elevation is, distances from the road up to?
We have a topographical map. Corey, you can go to the overall site plan, which is really big on it. So that's a cross section. But if you go to the M1, 533, and one of these will be the topographical. You scroll down. I can get you those specific.
I just was curious because you have a retaining wall there. much of that, how much of that building actually, will actually see, and I really don't like to
Demo building E.
Yeah, as you drive down Woods Hole Road.
Yeah, and bear in mind, this setback here, this is the road down here, this is about a 100-foot stretch of Mass DOT property that runs up a very steep grade there.
So you'd be looking at roof line from there, or?
You'll be looking at that elevation, you'll catch the top story and a half.
My other question was, how close is the existing building to the dome, the current building that's there?
I don't know the school number back yet. If you go to, so this is the existing building. And what we've done is we've kept the building E behind that setback in order to maintain those view corridors.
So are you the same distance?
No, we're a little bit closer.
Well, we've eliminated this building, which is also visible from the street. That's the 1975 entrance addition.
Can you tell which are the structures on that drawings?
Oh, yeah.
Kristen's right.
I can't comment about, I mean, on paper, it looks like the building is very close to the dome. What we'd like to propose to you, if it's acceptable, is we'd like to try to arrange a site visit for the commission to get a feel for the true layout. Again, it's very deceiving when you look at flat paper of what you're really looking at and seeing. So
We'd be happy to do that at the board's convenience.
if we could try to work together and try to come up with a mutually convenient time, if you could show us where the buildings actually are, I think that would help us a lot. Any other questions?
On the front road side, there's a strong line, and it looks like concrete site wall blocks, right behind the line, this straight line here. Is that
I
what
think
that's?
that's a limit of work.
A limit of work, bales of hay, or is that a retaining wall, or?
There's no retaining wall on that
There's a
building.
retaining wall between the dome and
There's
No,
currently
he's
a
talking
big
about
wall
on
there.
On a DOT setback
I
here.
mean, this looks like
that's just a limit of work line, like
that's
a hay bale line.
a hay bale line, so that's not gonna become one of those concrete retaining
No,
walls.
that's a limit of work because that's the DOT layout there.
There is a wall on the site currently.
There's some retaining walls in here.
There's an existing wall somewhere. I think on site we could see that a lot of that.
We can talk about lighting, signage,
Any lighting in regards to compliance, of course. Down lighting.
Excuse me.
Do you want to speak to lighting? I'm not sure if we have someone here who can speak to lighting other than.
As far as,
can you tell us who you are, please?
Mark Prigozhin, one of the developers of the project.
The lighting's going to be down lighting, so it's meant to be soft, different lighting throughout the project. We've had a lighting specialist that worked in conjunction with the engineering department, and then we discussed that with the planning board and the zoning board. We'd be happy to get you more details on what the lighting will be.
We want to know what those are, maybe pictures of the fixtures. You're planning a sign at the street to identify the property?
Yeah, so we'll make sure we get all those details.
We want to see that as well.
Talking about building lighting and site lighting?
Building lighting and site lighting. Signage, you know, if there's a sign announcing whatever the name of the development is, that's going to be involved. I don't know if you're putting that signage on both entranceways. Is there any lighting planned for the dome?
Minimal lighting at this point. What we're trying to do is just keep, same style lighting that is on the rest of the property.
We want that information.
I have a question for Ken. Where'd he go? Oh, there you are. Hi, Ken. So when you were talking about the big building, which we're not discussing here,
Counselor, do you want to plan to come back at the next November meeting or December? What do you think what's your pleasure? The application dates, December?
November 9th.
Expired?
Decision deadline.
Okay.
We're happy to sign in the sense to a waiver of the.
Okay, so we'll.
I actually have a vacation scheduled November 5th myself, so I prefer December.
Okay. So we'll approve a 60-day extension of the deadline.
My wife will thank you.
60 days past the expiration date. That's some leeway. So I'll make a motion that we continue the application until our site visit.
Set a date for that now? Because
Well, we have to get some dates from our team, and I'll call Cory with a few pencils.
We have to say that. We have to say, I think we have to post it. So we have to post it because the whole board will be there. So
I'll second.
all in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much for
So
your time.
we'll see you when you're ready, like I said, if it's December, you're ready, just let us know.
I expect it will be, but I'll be in touch with Cory about the date.
Okay, great, thank
Send
you.
it.